very loudly. Kids, there's just no filter. So she just goes, "What's wrong with you?" When she said that, her parents kind of like took her a little bit and they're like, "Shh." But then they kind of stopped and looked up at me. Like they were waiting for an answer too. Like, yeah, what is wrong with you? So they wanted to know too. But anyway, so I look at this little girl and I just told her, when I was your age, I didn't eat my vegetables. I really freaked her out at that point. And I kind of, at this point, half expected her dad to just punch me in the face. Like, what would I do? Block it? So I knew I was about to get punched. And she looked over at her dad, like, scared, and her dad just stood there and he just did this. That's it. So I wanted to tell you that story just so you could get a little picture into who I am as a person. I'm sometimes nice, I'm sometimes not nice. So just depends on the day, depends on how I'm feeling. But hey, I want to go ahead and take you back to the beginning of my life and really share with you what God's done. And if there's one thing I want you to get from today's message and just from me being here, you can forget about what I look like, you can forget my name, everything. But I want you to remember that God is always moving. God is always working. God is always orchestrating our path and our plan and our purpose according to His will. And guess what? His will is perfect. Even when things don't look like they're going our way, it's always for our good. Always for our good. So I want you to just remember that for the rest of today, for the rest of your life, if you get anything from today. So I was born without arms, as you can tell, and I was actually born pretty far away from the state of Virginia. I was born in a country called Romania. I was born in a small little village that at the time didn't have a name or anything. It just had a number. So it was a small, poor little village in Romania. And when my biological parents took me back to the village, they were immediately shunned and hated and scorned because there was this belief that children, or anybody really who had a disability, they were cursed. They were cursed by God. They were believed to have evil spirits living inside of them. So when my biological parents took me back to their village, no-name village, they were completely just hated. So here they were thinking like, man, this is no life for him. We have nothing to offer him. So they had to make this impossible decision of, okay, what do we do? What do we do with this? What do we do next? And they decided that they couldn't take care of me. And what they did was they put me in an orphanage in the city of Timișoara. And I was in this orphanage for the first couple years of my life. And things did not get better for me in the orphanage because that same belief, the same superstition that I was cursed was also present in this orphanage too. So here I was, this little baby in this orphanage, thrown in a crib by myself, and I was never held, I was never loved, I was never cared for, I was never fed properly. I was completely neglected and abandoned and quite literally left for dead because I was seen as less. Because I was seen as less human because I didn't have arms. Because I was born this way. That my life didn't hold as much value, that my life didn't matter as much, and that I was actually a curse. So no way did these nurses want anything to do with me. Completely neglected, completely abandoned. There was even a doctor who came into the orphanage, and he had to give like a medical evaluation of all the babies in the orphanage, and because we're all orphans. And he came over to my crib, and he looked down, and he saw the condition that I was in, the malnourishment, the lack of care, the lack of love, and he told the nurses in the orphanage that, well, he's just going to die. He's just going to die soon anyways. There's no hope here. He just, what a sad story. He should never have been born. He's just going to die soon anyway. And what he did next was he took a piece of paper and he wrote a month and a year and he taped it to my crib and he left one blank and he said, hey, you just fill in the day of when he dies. And he titled that paper death date, just to get ahead of it. Death certificate. So yeah, not a very happy beginning of my life. Not a lot of hope, not a lot of love, not a lot of anything, just complete abandonment, complete neglect, complete hopelessness. But man, we serve a God who is again always working, always moving, has a plan and a purpose for my life, and has a plan and a purpose for your life as well. On the whole other side of the world, while I was dying, quite literally dying in this Romanian orphanage, God was already moving the parts. God was already moving the pieces. He was working on the hearts and minds of a couple here in the States by the names of Mike and Sharon, spoiler alert, Dennehey. And Mike and Sharon Dennehey they had a pretty nice life. They had 3 kids of their own. They had a nice house. Mike had a really good job, and they went to church every Sunday. They were doing the thing. They were doing the Christian life. They were just living life. But they went to church one Sunday, and basically the sermon was about comfort. The sermon was essentially about being comfortable as a Christian, and that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. You know, I guess you could be a Christian. You could go to church every Sunday. You could read your Bible and you go to Bible study. That's fine and that's good. But if you really want to follow Jesus, if you really want to be a disciple and really, truly find your purpose and do all that God can call you to do, it's going to lead you to some uncomfortable places. And that's good. That's a good thing. My dad always says, if you're feeling comfortable in your life, then you're not doing the right thing. And they felt really by this when they were listening to the sermon, and maybe just because they had 3 kids and they had a good job and a comfortable house, but they really felt convicted to step out of their comfort zone and really live for the Lord more and do more for the kingdom. And they both had 2 very different ideas of what that would look like. Mike's idea was, hey, let's go to a homeless shelter every week. And let's go, feed the homeless. And let's go to a vet and feed animals and do that. And all of those things are good things. I'm not downplaying that. But Sharon's idea, she came up to Mike and she said, well, what if we adopted a child that nobody else in the world wanted to adopt? Just very like that. And you know what he said? Good. He said that sarcastically. Husbands, sure, honey. You ever said that? Wife has an idea and you go, okay, yeah, you do. Yes, honey, fine. That's what he said. He didn't want to do that. But Sharon said, hey, well, I have these newsletters, these adoption newsletters. I just want you to look at them. Just look at them. That's it. He said, okay, I'll do that. So one day he went to work and he was looking at the newsletters while he was at work, and she was also looking through the newsletters while she was at work. And she came across this one picture that really caught her attention. It was a black and white picture of a baby boy with no arms. And there's a little description under the picture, which read, baby boy born without arms, desperately needs a loving family. Then it said, this boy will soon die, ... And that's how it ended. And, she read that and she really knew that they were being called and she was being called to fill in those dots. To fill in the dots. Because that sentence, that description, it didn't end with a period. It's a ... There can be a continuation. Your life is ... continuation. God is continually writing our story ... Whatever you're going through right now, you're going through it ... Not over. It's not over. So she saw that. She saw that and knew exactly what she wanted to do. And then Mike came home and he said, okay, well, I looked through the newsletter. I've actually found somebody that looks really interesting. And she said, oh, well, I did too. Are we adopting 2 kids? He showed her the picture that he saw. And it was the exact same picture that she saw. She saw. Wow, can't talk. So you know what they did? They flew to Romania. They did all the paperwork. They did everything they needed to do. They flew to Romania. They picked me up for the first time. And even as they were picking me up, the nurses were telling them, no, don't. He's cursed. But they picked me up. They held me. I was 2 years old and I weighed 9 pounds. I was dying. I was sick. I couldn't hold my head up. I was almost a dead body. My dad says, you looked like just a dead body. You know what they did? They adopted me. They took me into their family. They gave me a new name, new hope, a new future, and a new trajectory of my life. So at one point, I was this dying orphan with no hope, no future, no anything. But then because of adoption, because of somebody's love, just love, because I didn't have anything to offer them. I didn't do anything to deserve to be adopted. I didn't buy my adoption. They just did it because they loved me. That's it. I was given this new name, this new hope, this new future. A family, a place to belong, a purpose. Let me ask you something. Does this sound familiar to anybody in here? Does this sound familiar to anybody in here? If you're in here and you're a believer, I just want to throw this out there. If you're in here and you're a believer and you've never thought of yourself as adopted. Adopted, I want you to really think on that maybe in the next couple weeks. Because think about how at one point in your life, you were kind of an orphan, like an actual spiritual orphan with a death date on your crib. And then what? Jesus comes in, picks you up, says, hey, you're not nobody. You're not mistaken. You're not an accident. You belong somewhere. You matter. And he picks you up and brings you into his family, puts you at his table, gives you food, changes your name, changes your trajectory. That's what the Lord, that's what he does for us. I just wanted to throw that out there. If you haven't thought of yourself as adopted, think about that. Ponder that. Pray on that. Family that we get to belong to. And it's really amazing. You know, my parents, they had those 3 kids of their own. They adopted me, and then they actually went on to adopt 9 more children from 5 other countries. My mom got pretty addicted to adopting. Basically, she just didn't stop. You know, the joke is that my mom is the gas pedal in this operation, and my dad is the brakes. And I like to say, you know, to put it pretty easily for people to understand, my parents, they have 3 homemade cookies, and they have 10 store-bought cookies. And if it's anything like my mom's actual baking, you want to go with the store-bought cookies, which you did. So thank you, Drew. You went with the store-bought cookies. Love it. You know, people always come up to me when I'm talking about my family or sharing kind of just how many kids my parents adopted from all these different countries. You know, there's Thailand, China, Ethiopia, the U.S., India, Romania, yours truly, all these countries represented, and people say, man, your parents, they're such saints. Like, wow, they're so amazing. I could never do that. I could never do that. Like, that's great that they did all that, but I could never do that. I could never adopt. And that might be true. That's fun. That's the thing. And I love that I get to say this, because they're my parents. They're not saints. They're saints in the term of they're believers, which categorizes them as they are now saints because they're believers, but they're not saints in the term that the way that people always say, like they're such special people. And they would say that too. If they were here this morning instead of me, they would say, don't look at us and see that everything, you know, all these kids we adopted and say how great and amazing and special we are. We aren't these special people who adopted all these kids. We are just obedient. That's it. They were just obedient. God called them to this life of adoption, and they were obedient. God had a plan and a purpose for their life, and all they had to do was be obedient. And let me tell you, my parents are not experts on adoption. They're not experts on special needs adoptions. They're not experts on caring for kids with special needs or anything like that. They're not any kind of experts. They're just obedient. And a lot of us sometimes think that we have to be experts before we jump into what God's calling us to do. Sometimes we feel unqualified. Sometimes we feel like we're not good enough or we can't do it because we don't know everything about it before we jump into it. God doesn't call us to be know-it-alls or experts in anything. He just calls us to be obedient. And if there's one thing I could say that my parents would want you to know is that that's just what he wants you to do. That's what God wants us to do, is to just be obedient to what he has. And that's it. But if there's one thing I can credit my parents to, because, you know, again, they didn't have expertise in caring for kids with special needs. They didn't know exactly how I'd grow up, and they didn't. They had questions. They didn't know if I'd be super independent. They didn't know if I would need help all my life. All they knew and all they prayed to and clung to is the fact that if God made me, then surely God would sustain me. In some way or another, God would sustain me. So that's how they, I mean, to be honest, that's really how they approached this life of caring for me, caring for my brothers, I have a sister who has no arms or no legs, and she's at Liberty in college now, doing her thing, and she has a little foot, and she can wave at people, and she doesn't drive yet, but she does a lot. But that's the thing, they just know that God will sustain us. So my parents, they really pushed all of us to be as independent as we could and learn how to do things our own way. So when I talk about overcoming challenges, and you know, I don't have arms, so I do everything with my feet or with my chin or whatever. I do things differently. And I had to learn and I had to figure out how to do all these things differently. And my parents, they It was probably hard for them now that I think about it, because I'm a parent and I want to do everything for my kids because I love them. But sometimes I realize that sometimes I have to let them struggle. That's kind of where I'm getting at. Sometimes I have to let them struggle. And I think my parents, they realized that they had to let me struggle. They had to let me overcome on my own. And sometimes I wonder if that's what God does for us too. He sees us when we're going through hard times. He sees us when we're going through hard seasons. He sees us when we're struggling, and he is God, so he could just jump in and save the day. And sometimes he does. Sometimes he does. But I have to believe that maybe God, our Heavenly Father, sees us and he says, no, they got to struggle. They got to go through the fire. They got to go through the flames. They got to come out the other side stronger. They can get through this. And that's what my parents did for me, and I was able to just really learn how to do everything. You know, I do everything that everybody else does. I just do things different. And when I go to schools, and I love talking at schools and talking to students, talking about being different, all this stuff, and I tell kids, like, I do things differently than everybody else, but different doesn't mean less. Different doesn't mean less. And I didn't really cope with the fact or really understand the weight of my disability, I guess you could say, until about middle school. So, you know, as a kid, it's a little different when you're just a little kid. And another kid comes up to me and he goes, hey, where are your arms? And I just say, I don't have any. And he says, okay, cool, and goes and plays and forgets all about that conversation. It's different when you're 3 or 4, you know? But when you're 10 years late, when you're 13, 12, 11, 14, it's a little different. And around this time is when I started to experience some of the darker themes in life. Some of the more challenging themes in life, things like bullying, things like being picked on, things like being called names. You know, just middle school is a hard time. Going into middle school is a very scary transition sometimes, and it can be tough. And I was picked on and bullied a lot in these first couple of years, and this was kind of the first time I ever experienced anything like this. So I'm getting picked on and being called nasty names, and getting pushed in the hallway and getting my backpack taken off my shoulder, and just really mean kids in my school. And it got me to a very low place in my life where I became very angry. I became very sad and depressed and just very dark. And I grew up in church. So I grew up, you know, in going to Sunday school and hearing all the verses like Jeremiah 29:11 and John 3:16 and Philippians 4:13. And I grew up hearing all these verses, like all these great verses. And that's kind of what I mentioned earlier, is it's very easy to just do the Christian thing when things are good. But then when real life happens, what happens next? What do you do next? I ended up feeling very alone and very isolated, and I didn't have any friends. I just felt like I didn't matter. And really what began to happen was the enemy began to have a very strong hold on my heart. You see, I believe a couple things. I believe, one, that the enemy is real. The enemy is real. If you ever find yourself at a church where they don't really talk about spiritual warfare, they don't like to talk about dark stuff, you know, it's not happy. They don't want to talk about dark stuff. Don't go to that church, because life isn't always happy. Life isn't always good. Life isn't always fair even. It's just not. And the enemy is real. And I'm a firm believer that the enemy, he wants you to feel like you can't be used by God. You know, he wants a lot of things from us. He wants to destroy us. He seeks to destroy. But I think if he can make us feel like we can't be used by God, then man, if we can't be used by God, then what good are we? We're completely meaningless. If God can't use us, then we don't matter. And that's what I felt like. I felt like I just didn't matter. I felt like a mistake. I felt like an accident. I felt hopeless. And to be honest with you, I kind of felt like an orphan again. I kind of felt like an orphan, like a spiritual orphan with no place to belong. I must have been 15 or 16 or 17, and I was in church one Sunday, and you know, it's not because I wanted to be at church. I hated God. Remember, I hated God. I hated myself. I hated my life. I hated not having arms. I was depressed. I was angry. I was suicidal. But I was sitting in church, and the pastor starts reading from the book of John, and it's John chapter 9. And I don't know if we have it on the screen. Okay, yeah, great, we do. I want to read this to you because this passage changed me. Jesus passed by. He saw a man which was blind from his birth. So he sees a disabled guy on the side of the road. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And I want to pause right here, because when I'm sitting here as a teenager listening to this, I'm like, this is crazy. You know, this disabled guy on the side of the road, and the disciples see him, and they probably do a double take. And then what? They ask. They can't help themselves. No filter. They just blurt. What happened? Man or his parents? And you know, it's so interesting. When I read this, when I heard this at this point in my life too, I completely got taken back, because I was having kind of these crazy thoughts. When you're going through depression, there's a lot of dark thoughts going around in your head. They're dark. They're evil. They're not from God. And I remember thinking things even like, man, what if my Romanian parents were really bad people, or they were sinners in Romania, and this was God's punishment to them by making me be born without arms? You know, what if God gave them a son with no arms? Just so many thoughts. Either this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. Cool? I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no man can work. In the world, I am the light of the world. Thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle, the saliva. And he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. So he wiped this on the blind man's eyes, and he said unto him, Go, wash in the pool of Siloam. I always say one way or another, which is by interpretation sent. So the pool of scent, we're just going to say that. He went his way, therefore, and washed, and he came seeing. So his eyes were open, he could see now. The neighbors, therefore, and they which before had seen him, that he was blind, said, Is not this he that sat and begged? And the KJV is a different breed. So it's crazy. That whole passage, they're walking on this path. They see this blind man on the side of the road. The disciples, Jesus' closest friends even, this disabled guy, and they just say, what happened to him? And they're asking, right? Like, he must have sinned. His parents must have sinned. Something must have went wrong. There's no way this happened intentionally. And the Bible doesn't say this, but I kind of picture Jesus almost shaking his head a little bit. Like, you guys really asked this? Like, you really think that? Because then he says, no. It wasn't his sin. It wasn't his parents' sin, but he was born this way so that the works of God could be made manifest through him. And I thought that was pretty cool to see. But then you keep reading, and what does he do? He spits on the ground, takes the mud, wipes it on the man's eyes, and literally cures his disability. This man was disabled? Not anymore. Now he's not disabled anymore. He can see. And not only that, he has a testimony. He's got a testimony. The Lord healed his disability, and now everyone around is like, hey, weren't you blind like 2 seconds ago? He's like, yeah, now I'm not. Now I just have mud in my eyes. Like, who did that? How? He's like, that guy over there, his name is Jesus. I don't know much about him. He did that, and now I want to know everything about him because he healed my disability. So here I was, this 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid, and you know what I'm thinking? Wait, God, couldn't you heal me? Couldn't you heal my disability? God, couldn't you give me arms? You healed this blind man. He's not disabled anymore. Because I'm thinking, God, you made me be born without arms. Like, how loving is that? What kind of loving God does that? What I have is called bilateral upper limb deficiency. That's the medical term of it. And one out of every 1 million or 2 million kids are born with it. And I was thinking during this time, like, how does a loving God do that? But then I'm reading this and I'm like, wait, God is all powerful, right? God is all great, right? So couldn't God make me wake up tomorrow with arms? He could. And that was my prayer. That's what I said. I was like, man, Lord God, if you are good, if you are so good, and if you are so loving, and you are so great, then make me wake up tomorrow with arms. Make me wake up tomorrow with arms. It would be like peace. You could just blink, happen. And God, imagine the testimony that would bring. Imagine that testimony that would bring. Imagine what we could do. I could go tell everybody. I could have pictures of me before without arms, and I could have pictures of me now with arms, and how many people we could reach. Like, come on. This is what I want. I just want to be like everybody else. I just want to have arms. And then one morning, I woke up and I had arms. Then I forgot to eat my vegetables that day. Just kidding. I never woke up with arms. I never woke up with arms. What does that mean? What does that mean? You know, I look back at this time and I realized a couple of things. Number one, I realized that what I was doing was I was bargaining with God. You ever done that? In even just little ways. I think we do it a lot, kind of without even thinking about it. We bargain with God. If we just say, Lord, God, if you could just help me get through this, then I'll be set. Then I'll be good. God, if you could just help me out of this situation, then I'll never mess up there again. I'll never go back to that place. I'll never go back to that house. I'll never go back to that person. Just help me not have to deal with this. Just rescue me from this. And, you know, sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. He is sovereign. But we do that, don't we? And I look back and I'm thinking like, man, what if God actually did that? Like, what if I actually woke up, like for real, with arms, like regenerated like a toad, like actual arms? Like, wouldn't that be crazy? It would have been amazing. I mean, seriously, we can admit that. Don't feel sorry for me. Like, it would be cool. It would be pretty cool. And I could have gone and like preached that and said, I didn't have arms for it, now I do. I would have had what I wanted. It would be just like everybody else. But here's the thing. Oh, me. I know myself. Years would have gone by. I don't know how long it would have lasted. Months, years, decades even, but eventually, I would have gotten to a point where I would have gotten used to it. I would have forgotten what it was like to not have arms. It would just be normal for me. So then guess what? There would come another time in my life. There would come another time in my life when I would say, okay, you know, God, the arms thing, that was cool, but, you know, now I really need your help again. Now I really need this again. I need something else. I want this. And guess what? And then I'll actually be happy. And then I'll be happy. With God like that, it's not faith. It's just not faith. It's saying, Lord, do this for me, and then I'll follow you. And as I look back, and if I would have had arms and I would have gone through life now with arms and sharing that, something else would have come up in my life. Because here's the thing. It was never about not having arms. For me, for my life, it's not about not having arms. This is my favorite part about why I get to be here. As I look around this room, I look at all you faces, my family, my Way Church family, and I realize that I am not the only disabled person in here. I'm the only disabled person in here. Because here's the thing, when I think about that, eventually not the having arms thing would have gotten old, I would have needed something else. Disability is not of a physical nature. It's not the not having arms. It's my heart. So I am disabled, but it's not because I don't have arms. I'm disabled because of everything that goes on the inside, of my own struggles, of my own sin. I mean, really, I'm disabled because I live in a sinful and broken world, and I am a sinful and broken person. And if we are honest with ourselves, and if we take a good look in the mirror and truly reflect on who we are all broken. We are all disabled. We all have things about us sometimes where we just say, God, why did you do this to me? Why did you make me deal with this? Why did you make me go through this? Why are you making me face this? Why am I born this way? Why am I born that way? How could you do this? How could you do that? Maybe change our perspective. Maybe we need to ask the Lord to change our perspective. Maybe we need to ask different questions and saying, God, how could you? Maybe instead we need to ask God, how can you? How can you help me grow through this? How can you teach me through this? So here's the thing. The Lord, Jesus, he didn't give me new arms. But just like the blind man, he gave me sight. He gave me new eyes, which is infinitely better. He gave me an even better miracle. So either way, I'm still going around, I'm sharing this with anybody I can. This is why I get to stand here and smile and have joy. And just like Philippians 4:13 says, do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Not that I can drive a car or I can play guitar or, I need to write, drive a car, play guitar. I just made a rhyme. Anyways, not that I can do all these things with my feet. That's just my life. But do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can literally go through life and be content because it's Christ who strengthens me. It's Jesus who is my living hope. And maybe you are in here this morning. Before I just share a song with you, you might be in here this morning. You might be going through just a really difficult season, just a really challenging season that's shaking you and testing your faith and making you question, making you doubt, making you wonder. And it's so easy for us. It's so interesting. We're all human. And, when we're going through life, when we're going through hard things, all we can see is what's right in front of us. We're so affected by the here and now and so, thrown by what's going on right now at this moment, at this day. And, it's fine. We're human. That's just what happens to us. But we're not the ones in control. And things happen in life that are out of our control. Because, again, we live in a sinful and broken world. And if you're anything like me, you want to know why. You want to know the whys. You want to have all the answers. You want to know, okay, why am I going through this? You want to know why. And sometimes you might not know why until you're out of it. And you know what? Sometimes you might never know why until you meet him face to face. And as I've gotten older and I've thought about this and thought about my own human nature and how I want to have all the answers, I take a look back to Genesis and saying, man, wanting to have all the answers, wanting to know everything, wanting to know all the answers and the whys, that's what led to our downfall in the first place. The tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's just in our human nature to want to know everything, to be in control, to be in charge. But man, we are not in control. We are not in charge. And it's not about you. So easily, I can feel like I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not talented enough, I'm not rich enough, I'm not brave enough, I'm not this enough. God can't use me because I'm too messed up in this area. God can't use me because I made too many mistakes in my past. God can't use me because I'm still struggling right now with this or that. Do that. What we're doing, we're making it all about ourselves. That's what we're doing. We're making it all about ourselves as if, what? God can't use us because of us? No, God can use us despite us. Because he is God and we are not. That's it. That's really what I want you to understand this morning is that God made you for a plan and for a purpose. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what class you're in, what skin color you are, whatever you are. What mistakes you've made, it doesn't matter because it's not about you. Doing that because I love saying this and I love opening up about this because it's so backwards to what the world tells us. It's so backwards to what culture tells us that, hey, life is all about you. It's all about what you want. It's about what makes you happy. Just you do you. But it's not. We could try that all we want, but then what happens when tragedy strikes? What happens when trauma strikes? We realize that we're actually not in control. But man, we can surrender. We can rest. Rest in the one who is in control, who does have a plan, who does have a purpose. And it's the only time in the world when surrendering can be the very thing that frees us. So I want to share and just close real quick with a song that I wrote. It's called Not Abandoned, and it's kind of about a lot of this. It's about being an orphan. It's about feeling alone, feeling abandoned wherever we might be, but then that answer, we feel like an orphan sometimes, but God has a different story for us. So this is called Not Abandoned. day. And He, for as long as you can remember, trapped inside this hollow shell. God wants to make you their own. You're gonna find out on this pathway. That's in a wasteland. Always fighting for a chance just to not alone. There wants to make you their own. You're gonna lead you home. And not alone, there is a Savior. He wants to make you His own. You're gonna find out on this road. There is a pathway that's gonna lead you home. You're not abandoned. Abandoned. Thank you all so much.
Or what? Hey, can you give him a hand? Thank you for sharing your story, for being open and honest. And he'll never tell you this, so I'm going to brag on him for a second. You guys can have a seat. We're gonna do one more song, and then we'll do some announcements to get you guys out of here. But what a powerful story, man. And let me tell you something, how, and I hate preachers when they come up and preach after the preacher, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to tell you how the one thing that stood out, he said that his parents were just obedient. And if that's one thing you guys can take away from his story, whatever God's telling you to do, just say yes. Just be obedient. Whatever that looks like in your personal life, just say yes. Because his parents, yes, kept this guy alive. And let me tell you this, what he does is like I said, he does this for a living. So he travels the world giving his story. He does it at adoption agencies. And because of him sharing his story, he has inspired other people to adopt hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other kids. He's raised hundreds and thousands of dollars for adoption agencies. So not one life was just saved, but hundreds and hundreds more were saved because his parents said yes, and now he's saying yes. So that's all I want to leave you guys. Just say yes. Whatever God's telling you to do, to be obedient, just say yes. Hey, can you give George a hand one last time? Thank you for that. Powerful stuff, man.